He tried to stop the blind pianist's performance, but was left speechless. Richard Thompson clenched his fists as he watched the commotion backstage at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. The year's most important benefit concert was about to begin, and he knew his reputation as an impresario depended on every detail going perfectly. It was when he saw the young pianist being guided to the stage that his blood boiled. Emily Carter, just 22 years old, walked with cautious steps, her white cane lightly tapping the floor. Richard stormed over to the event director, Margaret Wilson, his face red with anger. "Margaret, this is outrageous. A visually impaired person should never perform on this sacred stage," he whispered, trying not to be overheard by nearby musicians. "Richard, she was approved by the committee. She's an exceptional pianist," Margaret replied firmly. "Committee? What committee? I own this theater. My father built this tradition with sweat and blood, and I won't let it be tarnished by this." Emily stopped walking. Her ears were sharp, trained to catch every whisper, every breath. She had heard every word. Her fingers trembled not just from the natural nerves before a performance, but from the humiliation she'd just witnessed. Margaret approached her, gently touching her arm. "Emily, dear, it's all right. You're going to shine up there." "I heard what he said," Emily murmured, her voice shaky. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I shouldn't be here." "Don't ever say that. You earned your place here with pure talent. Don't let anyone take that from you." Richard watched the scene from afar, his eyes narrowed. He had built his entire life around perfection, tradition, and the status this theater represented. Seeing a blind young woman on the main stage felt like an affront to everything he believed in. He quickly marched to the sound booth where Derek, the technician, was preparing the equipment for the evening. "Derek, I need you to do something for me," Richard said, his voice low and commanding. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, what do you need?" "When the girl starts playing, you'll cut the piano's microphone. Say it was a technical issue." Derek hesitated, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Sir, that'll ruin her performance, and the audience will definitely notice." "That's exactly what I want. She'll be humiliated and never want to set foot on this stage again. It's for everyone's good." "But sir..." "That's an order, Derek. Do you want to keep your job or not?" The technician lowered his head, resigned. He'd known Richard for years and understood how ruthless the man could be when crossed. Backstage, Emily tried to focus. She closed her eyes, though it made no difference to her, and began mentally playing the piece she'd chosen. It was a Chopin composition, one that always calmed her in moments of pressure. "Emily," a gentle voice called to her. It was Dorothy, a 70-year-old woman who had worked as the theater's seamstress for decades. "Hi, Dorothy." "Sweetheart, I saw what happened with Mr. Thompson. Don't pay him any mind. That man's heart has been hard as stone ever since he lost his daughter." "He lost his daughter?" "About 5 years ago. Rebecca was a pianist too, you know. But she left home after a terrible fight with her father and never came back. He gets like this, bitter, whenever he sees someone playing the piano." This information stirred something unexpected in Emily. Suddenly, the anger she felt toward Richard shifted into something else. Not pity, but a deep understanding of what pain could do to a person. "Where is she now?" "No one knows, dear. Richard never talks about it, but I see the sadness in his eyes whenever he passes the grand piano." The theater lights began to dim, signaling the start of the performance. Emily took a deep breath and walked toward the stage, her cane discreetly left backstage. The audience was packed. About 800 people filled the seats, including politicians, business people, and classical music lovers. In the front row, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, Richard's mother and widow of the theater's founder, watched with keen interest. Richard stood in the side wing, his eyes fixed on Emily as she approached the grand piano dominating center stage. He made a subtle gesture to Derek in the sound booth. "Good evening," Margaret said into the microphone. "It is with great pleasure that we introduce our next performer. Emily Carter, just 22 years old, is one of the most promising pianists of her generation. She comes from a humble family on the outskirts of New York City and earned a full scholarship to the Juilliard School of Music through pure talent." The audience applauded politely. Emily walked to the piano, her steps steady despite her lack of sight. She had memorized every inch of that stage during rehearsals. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. She sat on the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, the theatre was utterly silent. Richard made another gesture to Derek, who hesitated before placing his hand on the microphone button. Emily began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor echoed through the theatre with a purity that surprised even the most demanding critics. Her fingers danced across the keys with a precision and sensitivity few pianists could match. Richard, despite himself, felt a shiver run down his spine. The music was perfect. He shook his head, trying to push away the admiration rising in him, and gestured more firmly to Derek. The technician, with a heavy heart, finally turned off the piano's microphone. The sound stopped abruptly. Emily kept playing for a few seconds before realizing something was wrong. The acoustic feedback she expected from the amplified piano had vanished. She could feel the tension in the audience, the confused murmurs spreading. But instead of stopping, she did something that stunned everyone. She played louder. Without amplification, the acoustic piano still resonated through the theatre, though far more softly. The music became more intimate, more raw, more real. It was as if Emily were playing directly into the heart of every person there. Richard watched, frozen. He had planned to humiliate the young woman, but she was turning his sabotage into something magical. The audience, rather than growing restless, leaned forward, straining to catch every note. In the front row, Mrs. Eleanor slowly stood up. At 85, she had seen thousands of performances in that theatre, but had never witnessed anything like this. She began to clap, slowly at first, then with growing intensity. Others rose, following her lead. The applause swelled like a wave, filling the theatre with an energy Richard had never felt before. Furious at seeing his plan fail, Richard stormed out of the wing and marched determinedly toward the stage. His footsteps echoed, and people began to notice his approach. Emily kept playing, lost in her music until she heard the heavy steps nearing. She knew who it was. Still, she didn't stop. Richard climbed the side steps to the stage, his face red with anger. The audience murmured, shocked by the interruption. Some began to boo quietly. He strode toward the piano, ready to stop her physically if necessary. But when he got close enough to touch the instrument, something made him freeze. The melody Emily was playing was exactly the same one her daughter Rebecca used to play as a teenager. Note for note, phrase for phrase, it was identical to the way her daughter had played it years ago, before everything went wrong between them. Richard stood motionless, tears beginning to well in his eyes. The memories came flooding back like an avalanche. Rebecca at 15, playing piano in their living room. Rebecca at 17, being accepted into the conservatory. Rebecca at 20, confronting him about his authoritarian methods and his obsession with perfection. You never let me be myself, Dad. You want me to be perfect. But music isn't about perfection. It's about feeling. Those had been the last words Rebecca said to him before leaving home. Emily sensed his presence beside the piano, but kept playing. She could tell from his breathing, from the small sounds escaping his throat, that something profound was happening. The audience watched in absolute silence. The scene was surreal, the theater's executive standing like a statue beside the blind pianist, who continued playing as if nothing were amiss. Richard tried to speak, opening his mouth several times, but no sound came out. It was as if all the harsh words he'd spoken over the years had piled up in his throat, forming a knot that kept him from uttering a sound. Emily reached the end of the piece, the last notes fading into the theater's hushed air. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment, before turning slightly toward Richard. "Did you want to say something?" she asked softly. Richard opened his mouth again, but only a hoarse groan escaped. Emotion had completely overtaken him. For the first time in 5 years, he was experiencing music not as a product to be sold, but as an expression of the human soul. The audience began to applaud again, more fervently this time. Eleanor, still standing in the front row, shouted, "Bravo, bravo!" Others followed her lead, and soon the entire theatre was on its feet, applauding both Emily and, strangely enough, Richard, who remained frozen by the piano as if he'd seen a ghost. Margaret quickly stepped onto the stage, concerned. "Richard, are you all right?" she asked, gently touching his arm. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes and finally managed to whisper, "Rebecca, she played like this, exactly like this." "Who's Rebecca?" Emily asked, though she suspected the answer. "My daughter," Richard replied, his voice breaking. "My daughter, whom I lost because I was a fool." The theatre grew restless. People didn't know whether to keep applauding or if something was wrong. Margaret quickly took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a brief 15-minute intermission. The performance will resume shortly." The lights came up halfway and people began filing out to the lobby. Richard remained motionless, staring at Emily as if she were an apparition. "Mr. Thompson," Emily said, rising from the piano bench, "would you like to talk with me? In private?" He nodded slowly, unable to form words. Margaret guided them to a small dressing room backstage, away from the audience's curious eyes. Once alone, Richard finally found his voice. "How do you know this piece? Exactly the way my daughter played it." "I didn't know it was special to anyone," Emily replied honestly. "I learned it from a teacher at the conservatory. She said she'd learned it from a very talented student years ago." "What was the teacher's name?" "Professor Patricia Miller." Richard closed his eyes. Patricia had been Rebecca's teacher for years, before the family rift. Does she still teach there?" "Yes, sir. She's one of the best teachers we have. She always talks about a student who was special to her, a girl with a unique interpretation, but who disappeared suddenly." Tears began to stream down Richard's face without any hesitation. "That girl was my daughter, and I kicked her out of the house because she didn't want to follow my rigid standards of perfection." Emily stayed silent for a moment, taking in the information. "Do you know where she is now?" "I have no idea. Over the past 5 years, I've tried to find her many times, but she changed her name, her city. It's like she vanished from the world." "Why did you argue?" Richard took a deep breath, preparing to tell a story he had kept to himself for so long. Rebecca was 20 when it happened. She had just graduated from the conservatory and was being courted by several major orchestras, but she wanted to play popular music, wanted to perform in bars, in squares, wanted to bring music to ordinary people. "And you didn't approve?" "I thought it was a waste of talent. Our family's theatre has always been about the elite, about high culture. The idea of my daughter playing in dive bars made me furious." Emily began to understand the complexity of the situation. So she had to choose between what she loved and her father's approval. "Exactly. And in our last conversation, I said horrible things. I told her that if she chose that path, she would no longer be my daughter, that the theatre would never be hers. And she chose music. Yes, and I lost her forever." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A soft knock at the door interrupted the conversation. It was Margaret letting them know intermission was ending. "Richard, we need to continue the show. The audience is waiting." "I can't," he said, wiping his face. "Not after this. Cancel the rest of the performance." "No," Emily stood up, determined. "I'll continue. And you'll watch from the audience, like a proud father should." "But I tried to sabotage your performance, and yet I still played. It made me stronger. Now I want to play the next piece for you. It's something I composed myself, dedicated to all the fathers who've lost children because of pride." Richard looked at her with admiration. There was something about this young woman that reminded him not just of Rebecca, but of the person he himself had been before becoming so bitter. You composed too." "Ever since I lost my sight. Music became my way of expressing feelings words can't reach." They returned to the theatre where the audience had already settled back in. Richard made his way to the front row, sitting beside his mother. "Son," Eleanor whispered, What happened back there? Mom, I think I finally understood what Rebecca was trying to tell me years ago. Emily returned to the stage to warm applause. This time, Derek had properly reconnected the sound system, and her music filled the theatre with perfect clarity. The next piece I'll play is my own composition, Emily announced into the microphone. It's called Letter to an Absent Father, and it's dedicated to all those who've lost loved ones because of pride. She began to play, and the melody that emerged was unlike anything ever heard in that theatre. It was modern, yet rooted in classical tradition. It was sad, yet filled with hope. It was personal, yet universal. Richard closed his eyes and let the music carry him. Every note seemed to tell the story of his own pain, his own regret. It was as if Emily had looked straight into his soul and turned his feelings into music. During the performance, something extraordinary happened. People in the audience began openly crying. It wasn't embarrassment, but catharsis. Emily's music was touching wounds many had carried for years. A man in the third row was remembering the son he hadn't spoken to in decades. A woman in the upper seats thought of her mother, who had passed away before they could resolve an old argument. It was as if all the accumulated pain of those 800 people was being processed through Emily's music. Richard opened his eyes and looked around. He had never seen such an emotional reaction in his theatre. People weren't just listening to music, they were living a transformative experience. When Emily finished the piece, the silence that followed was different from before. It was a silence of contemplation, of fully absorbing what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, the applause began. But this time it was different. It was applause of gratitude, of recognition, of transformation. Richard stood up and began walking toward the stage. The audience noticed and grew curious about what would happen next. He climbed the steps and approached the microphone. His voice was shaky, but clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my earlier interruption. I need to confess something to all of you. The audience fell completely silent. A little over an hour ago, I tried to sabotage this extraordinary young woman's performance. I ordered the piano microphone to be turned off because I thought someone with a visual impairment shouldn't play on this stage. Murmurs of surprise and disapproval spread through the audience. But she taught me something tonight. She taught me that true music isn't seen with the eyes but felt with the soul, and that talent has nothing to do with physical limitations, but with the ability to touch hearts. He turned to Emily. Emily, you reminded me of why this theatre exists. It's not to showcase technical perfection, but to create moments of true human connection. I publicly ask for your forgiveness, and I hope you'll grant me the honor of continuing your performance. Emily stood and reached toward his voice. Richard took her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. Mr. Richard, we all deserve second chances, especially fathers who love their children, even when they don't know how to show it. The audience erupted in applause. Richard returned to his seat, but this time he was truly listening, truly feeling. Emily played 3 more pieces, each more impressive than the last. For the final one, she invited some of the orchestra musicians to join her, creating a moment of spontaneous collaboration that turned the performance into something truly magical. When it was over, the standing ovation was the longest in the theatre's history. People remained on their feet for over 10 minutes, applauding not just Emily but the transformation they had witnessed. Backstage, Richard waited for her. Emily, I'd like to make a proposal. I'm listening. I want you to become this theatre's artist in residence. I want you to have full access to the grand piano, to design your own concerts, to bring your musical vision here. Emily was surprised. Why? Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. This theatre doesn't belong to me, it belongs to music, and you are music in its purest form. She smiled, the first time he had seen her truly smile. I accept, on one condition. What? That you help me find your daughter. I have a feeling she's still out there, waiting for an excuse to come home. Richard felt his heart race. You'd do that for me? After what I tried to do to you? I'd do it for both of us. Every father deserves a second chance, and every daughter deserves to know she's loved. In the days following the concert, Richard and Emily worked together to try to locate Rebecca. They reached out to Professor Patricia, old classmates from the conservatory, and even hired a private investigator. It was through Professor Patricia that they got their first real lead. Rebecca was living in Boston, working as a music teacher at a community school on the outskirts of the city. She had changed her name to Rachel Davis and was married to a violinist. Richard wanted to travel immediately to Massachusetts, but Emily advised him to take it slow. "Mr. Richard, she left for a reason. If you just show up there, you might scare her even more. Let's try a gradual approach first." They decided Emily would write a letter to Rebecca, introducing herself as a fellow musician and casually mentioning her father to gauge her reaction. The reply came 2 weeks later. Rebecca had grown curious about Emily and also expressed interest in hearing news about her father. She admitted she thought of him every day, but was too afraid to attempt reconciliation. What they didn't know was that Rebecca had watched Emily's concert online. A video of the performance had gone viral on social media, especially the moment when Richard publicly apologized. Rebecca had cried for hours watching those images. Richard and Emily corresponded with Rebecca for 2 months. Gradually, the letters became more personal, more emotional. Rebecca began sharing details of her life in Boston, her work with underprivileged children, her happy marriage. Richard, in turn, started sharing his own changes, how he had transformed the Lincoln Center's programming to include more popular music, how he had created a scholarship program for young musicians from low-income backgrounds, how at 55 he was learning to listen to music with his heart instead of his ears. It was Emily who suggested the idea that would change everything. What if we organized a music festival at the center, something that blends classical and popular, traditional and folk? What if we invited Rebecca to participate? Richard was excited, but apprehensive. She might refuse, or she might accept. Sometimes we need to create the right opportunity for people to find courage. They planned the Musical Reconciliation Festival for 3 months later. It would be a week-long event, featuring different artists each day, culminating in a grand concert on Saturday night. The invitation letter to Rebecca was carefully crafted. They invited her to perform at the festival, explaining it would be a chance to showcase her work with popular music in a space that had once only valued classical. The reply took 3 weeks to arrive. When it did, Richard could barely hold the paper. His hands were shaking so much. "Dear Emily, I accept the invitation to the festival. I can't deny I'm curious to see the changes you mentioned at the center. I'd also love to meet you in person. I'll be traveling with my husband Andrew. See you in New York. Warmly, Rebecca." Richard cried as he read the letter. For the first time in 5 years, he was going to see his daughter again. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the preparations for the festival were intense. Richard was more nervous than he'd ever been. He rehearsed dozens of times what he would say to Rebecca, how he would act, how he would show he had changed. Emily, sensing his anxiety, decided to step in. "Mr. Richard, you don't need to perform. Just be sincere. Show her who you've become, not who you think she wants you to be." "What if she doesn't forgive me? Then at least she'll know you tried. And sometimes trying is enough to begin the healing." The day had come. Rebecca and Andrew landed in New York City on Thursday morning. Richard wanted to pick them up at the airport, but Emily convinced him it would be better to wait for them at the theater, on familiar ground. When Rebecca entered the theater for the first time in 5 years, Richard was tuning the grand piano on stage. He had learned to play a few simple pieces in recent months, as a way to connect with his daughter's memory. She stopped at the main entrance, watching him from afar. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but there was a softness in his movements she didn't remember seeing before. "Daddy?" she called softly. Richard stopped playing immediately. He turned slowly, almost afraid it was a dream. "Rebecca." They stared at each other for a long moment, unsure how to act. 5 years of hurt and longing hung in the air between them. It was Andrew who broke the silence. "So this is the famous theatre. Rebecca talks about it every day." Richard looked at the young man beside his daughter. He was about the same age Rebecca had been when she left home, with curly hair and a gentle smile. "You must be Andrew. Rebecca wrote a lot about you. And you must be Richard. I've heard a lot about you, too." There was an uncomfortable tension in the air. Rebecca fidgeted nervously with her hands, a habit Richard remembered from her childhood. "Dad, where's Emily? I'm excited to meet her." "She's at rehearsals with the youth orchestra. We started a program for musicians from underserved neighborhoods. It was her idea." Rebecca looked surprised. "Musicians from underserved neighborhoods? Here at the theater? A lot has changed, sweetheart. I've changed." They walked through the theater, Richard showing the renovations he had made. One room had been turned into a free rehearsal studio. Another had become a public music library. The foyer now displayed works by local artists instead of just European classics. "My God, Dad, this is incredible. Emily made me understand that music is for everyone, not just the elite, and that this theater belongs to the city, not to me." When they reached the main auditorium, they found Emily rehearsing with 15 young musicians, all between 16 and 25, from different underserved neighborhoods in New York City. Rebecca stopped at the entrance, moved. The music she heard was a perfect blend of classical and popular, exactly the kind of project she had always dreamed of doing. "Emily," Richard called gently. She stopped playing and turned toward his voice. "Rebecca's here." "Yes, she's with me." Emily stood and walked toward them, her steps steady and confident. When she was close enough, she extended her hand. "Rebecca, finally. I'm Emily Carter. I feel like I've known you for years." Rebecca took her hand and impulsively pulled her into a hug. "Emily, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for my father, and for me too. I didn't do anything but play music. The rest was the two of you." "That's not true," Richard interrupted. "You taught me how to listen again, to feel again." The following days were an emotional roller coaster for the family. Rebecca and Richard talked for hours, bringing up 5 years of hurt, resentment, but also buried love. Rebecca told him about her first years in Boston, how hard it had been to start over without family support, how she had spent months sleeping on friends' couches before getting settled, how she had cried every night that first year missing home. Richard in turn admitted he had searched for her since the first month she left, that he had hired investigators, visited every city where he thought she might be, that he had kept her room untouched for 3 years hoping she would return. "Why did you never reach out to me directly?" Rebecca asked. "Because I was afraid you'd reject me. And I knew I deserved that rejection. The things I said in our last conversation, they were unforgivable. Dad, I said horrible things too. I was hurt. But that doesn't excuse how I left home." "No, my dear. You were right. I was a tyrant. I wanted to control your life, your career, your dreams. You had to choose between being yourself and pleasing me, and you were brave enough to choose yourself." Andrew watched the conversation with respect, stepping in only when he felt the tension was growing too high. He had married Rebecca, knowing the full family history, and he admired the courage she showed in returning to face the past. On the eve of the big concert, Richard made an unexpected proposal. "Rebecca, I'd like to play with you tomorrow night. Dad, you barely know how to play. I've learned a few pieces, nothing sophisticated, but enough to accompany you in something simple. Emily taught me." Rebecca looked at Emily, who smiled and nodded. "He really has learned, and he's been very dedicated. I think it would be beautiful for you two to play together." "What do you want to play, Dad?" "That piece you composed when you were 17, Daughter's Dreams." "Do you remember?" Rebecca was stunned. It was a piece she had written as a teenager during a difficult time at school. She had thought Richard had never paid attention. "You remember that song?" "I remember every note. You used to play it when you were sad or needed to calm down. I'd stop by your bedroom door just to listen." "Why did you never say anything?" "Because I didn't know how. I didn't have the words to tell you how proud I was of you. How many times I wanted to walk into your room and say you were the most precious thing in my life. but all I knew was how to criticize, how to demand perfection. That night, they rehearsed together for the first time in their lives. Richard had truly learned to play, and though his technique was basic, there was an emotion in his performance that made up for any technical limitations. Emily watched from backstage, smiling. She knew she was witnessing something special, something that would forever change the relationship between father and daughter. The big day arrived. The theater was packed, with tickets sold out for weeks. The program featured many artists, but everyone knew the most anticipated moment would be Richard and Rebecca's performance. During the day, Rebecca presented her students from Boston, a group of underprivileged children playing instruments made from recycled materials. Richard watched from the audience, moved to see how his daughter had found her true calling. Emily opened the evening by playing the same piece she had performed months earlier, when everything began. But this time, the context was entirely different. Richard sat in the front row beside his mother and Andrew, applauding enthusiastically. Then came the moment for father and daughter. They walked on stage together, and the theater fell into absolute silence. "Good evening," Rebecca said into the microphone. "The piece we're playing tonight holds special meaning for us. I composed it when I was 17, during a time when I felt misunderstood and alone. I never knew my father knew it, until yesterday." Richard stepped up to the microphone. "This music represents everything I failed to say to my daughter for years. Today, I finally have the chance to play with her, literally and figuratively. Rebecca, thank you for giving me this second chance." They took their places at the grand piano, Rebecca on the high keys, Richard on the low. They began to play. The music was simple but deeply moving. Rebecca's notes told the story of a young woman searching for her identity, while Richard Thompson's responded like a father who had finally learned to listen. There wasn't a single person in the theater who wasn't in tears. This was more than a musical performance. It was a public reconciliation, a healing happening in real time before 800 witnesses. When they finished, the silence lasted nearly a full minute. Then, slowly, the applause began. But it was unlike any applause they had ever heard. It was applause of celebration, of gratitude for having witnessed something so intimate and transformative. Richard and Rebecca embraced on stage, and for the first time in 5 years, both felt they were truly home. Backstage after the concert, the entire family gathered. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, now with tears of joy, hugged her granddaughter for the first time since her return. "My dear granddaughter, how we've missed you in this house." "Grandma, I missed you too, all of you." Richard approached Emily Carter, who had made all of this possible. "Emily, how can I ever thank you for what you've done for our family?" "Mr. Thompson, I just played the piano, you all did the rest." "That's not true. You taught me that music is about connection, about love, about forgiveness. Without you, I would have remained a bitter man for the rest of my life." Rebecca joined the conversation. "Emily, I have a proposal for you. I'm listening." "Andrew and I are thinking of moving back to New York City. We want to start a community conservatory here, something that blends classical and popular music, making it accessible to underprivileged youth. Would you like to be our partner?" Emily was surprised and moved. "You'd really do that?" "Not alone," said Richard. "The Lincoln Center will be our main partner, and I've already spoken with some investors who are interested in supporting the project." "But Mr. Thompson, that means giving up some control of the theater." "Emily, this theater was never truly mine. It always belonged to music. Now it will finally serve its true purpose." In the months that followed, the project took shape quickly. The Harmony Conservatory opened 6 months later, occupying half of the theater's building. Rebecca became the educational director, Emily the artistic director, and Richard, to everyone's surprise, the administrative director. Andrew set up a social luthier program, teaching underprivileged youth how to build and repair musical instruments. Mrs. Eleanor, despite her advanced age, became the conservatory's official patron, attending events and supporting the students. The success was immediate. Within a year, over 200 children and young adults were studying at the conservatory, many from families who had never imagined having access to quality music education. Richard discovered a calling he never knew he had, working with young musicians. His business experience, combined with his newfound musical sensitivity, made him a valuable mentor to many students. Emily became one of the most respected pianists in the country, not just for her technical skill, but for her ability to use music as a tool for social change. She developed special methods for teaching music to people with different disabilities. Rebecca finally found the balance she had always sought between classical and popular music. Her arrangements of classical pieces for folk instruments became famous, and she was often invited to perform at festivals across the United States. 2 years after the reconciliation, Richard and Rebecca went on their first tour together, bringing music and the story of their reconciliation to cities nationwide. The show Father and Daughter, A Symphony of Forgiveness, became one of the most moving musical events in the country. During one of these performances in Washington, D.C., something unexpected happened. At the end of the concert, a man around 40 years old approached the stage. "Dr. Richard?" he called. Richard looked at the man, trying to recognize him. "I'm Michael Davis. You don't remember me, do you?" Richard focused. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "I was a sound technician at the theater about 8 years ago. You fired me when I made a mistake during an important performance." Richard felt his stomach twist. He vaguely remembered the incident. Back then, he had been ruthless with staff who made mistakes. "Michael, Dr. Richard, I didn't come here to confront you. I came to thank you." "Thank me? When you fired me, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to find another path. Today, I'm the technical director at the Kennedy Center, and the way you changed, your story of reconciliation with your daughter, inspired me to reach out to my own father, who hadn't spoken to me in years." Richard was moved. He had never imagined his transformation could inspire others. "Michael, I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. I was a different person back then." "I know, Doctor, and that's why I admire the change you've made even more. It's never too late to become a better person." These kinds of interactions became common during the tour. People who had been negatively affected by the old Richard came forward to share how his transformation had inspired changes in their own lives. At a performance in Miami, a woman approached Emily. "Sweetheart, you saved my family," she said, crying. "How so, ma'am?" "I watched the video of your first concert at the theater. The way you played despite your struggles, the way you forgave that man. It inspired me to forgive my husband after years of resentment. Today, we've been married for 25 years again." Emily realized her music was having an impact far beyond what she had imagined. It wasn't just entertainment, it was becoming a tool of healing for other families. Back in New York City, the conservatory continued to grow. Richard had implemented a scholarship program that covered not only lessons, but also instruments, transportation, and even meals for students in vulnerable situations. One of the most dedicated students was Lily, a 15-year-old girl who had lost partial hearing in an accident but refused to give up her dream of becoming a violinist. Emily worked with her personally, developing techniques that allowed her to feel the vibrations of music through her body. "Professor Emily," Lily said one day after a lesson, "you taught me that limitations only exist in our minds, right?" "How so, Lily?" "I thought I couldn't be a musician because of my hearing, but you showed me there are many ways to listen to music. With the body, with the heart, with the soul." Emily smiled. That was exactly what she had discovered years ago when she lost her sight. Physical limitations were just obstacles to overcome, not reasons to give up on dreams. Richard watched these interactions with growing admiration for Emily. She had become much more than a pianist or a teacher. She was a leader, an inspiration, a force for change. One day he called her for a private conversation. "Emily, I have a proposal for you." "I'm listening, Mr. Richard." "I want you to be my successor as the general director of the theater." Emily was surprised. "Mr. Richard, I don't have any experience in administration. You have something far more important: vision. You understand the true purpose of music, the power it has to transform lives, and you have the trust of the entire musical community in the city." "But what about Rebecca? Wouldn't she be the natural successor?" "Rebecca wants to focus on music education." She's happy running the conservatory, but the theatre needs someone like you, someone who understands our role is to serve the community, not just the elite. Emily Carter grew thoughtful for a moment. Can I give you an answer in a few days? Of course. But know this would be the right choice, not just for the theatre, but for the whole city. That night, Emily spoke to Rebecca about the offer. Emily, you should accept, Rebecca said without hesitation. But I still have so much to learn. We learn together, you, me, my father, my grandmother. We're all learning how to use music to make a difference. And you're the right person to lead this. What if I fail? What if I let people down? Emily, you've already done the impossible. You reunited a broken family, turned a bitter man into a devoted mentor, and built a school that's changing hundreds of young lives. Trust yourself. A week later, Emily accepted the offer. The transition ceremony was set for 6 months later, during the conservatory's 3rd anniversary. Preparations were intense. Richard Thompson wanted it to celebrate not just the leadership change, but all the progress made over the years. He planned performances from every conservatory group, beginners to advanced students, and invited alumni pursuing professional careers. Among the special guests was conductor Jonathan Williams, who had taken an interest in the conservatory and wanted to see the project firsthand. The week of the ceremony, Richard received an unexpected call. "Hello, Dad?" It was Rebecca, but her voice sounded shaky. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "Dad, I have to tell you something. Andrew and we're having a baby." Richard fell silent, processing the news. "Dad, are you there?" "Rebecca, I'm going to be a grandfather." "Yes, Daddy. And we want you very involved in this child's life." Richard began to cry, first with joy, then with deep sorrow. "Honey, I'm so afraid of repeating the same mistakes." "Dad, you're not the same man, and this time I'll be here to help. We'll raise this child together, with music, love, and patience." "When is the baby due?" "In 6 months, around the conservatory's anniversary." Richard smiled through his tears. Life was giving him a second chance, not just to be a father, but a grandfather too. The night of the ceremony, the theatre was more packed than ever. People of all ages and backgrounds filled the seats, united by their love of music and admiration for the project they'd watched grow. The show began with the younger students, 6- and 7-year-olds playing xylophones and recorders. Richard watched from the wings, moved to see children from families who could barely afford meals now receiving quality music education. The performances grew more sophisticated. Rebecca's youth group from Boston, now visiting New York regularly for exchanges. The youth orchestra Emily had formed. The senior choir Eleanor Thompson had created. Finally, the official transition arrived. Richard took the stage with Emily. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, 3 years ago, I was a bitter man obsessed with empty traditions and impossible standards of perfection. Today, I'm proud to pass the leadership of this theatre to a woman who understands music's true power." He turned to Emily. "Emily Carter, you taught me music isn't about flawless technique or perfect performances. It's about human connection, about healing, about hope. I'm certain that under your leadership, this theatre will continue to be a space of transformation." Emily Carter stepped up to the microphone, visibly moved. "Ladies and gentlemen, I accept this responsibility with humility and determination. I promise this theatre will remain a place where everyone is welcome, where music serves as a bridge between different worlds, where each person can discover the magic within themselves." The audience erupted in applause. Richard Thompson symbolically handed the theatre keys to Emily, and they embraced on stage. But the night wasn't over yet. Rebecca took the stage for one final surprise. "Dad, Emily, all of you," she said into the microphone, "I'd like to perform one last piece tonight. It's a song I composed especially for this occasion. It's called New Beginning." She sat at the piano and began to play. The music was unlike anything she'd composed before, joyful, hopeful, celebratory. It told the story of a family lost and found again, of a project born from wounds turned into purpose. During the performance, Richard looked around the theatre. He saw faces of all ages and backgrounds united by music, Former students who were now teachers, parents who had reconciled with their children, young people who had discovered talents they never knew they had. In the front row, Eleanor Thompson smiled proudly, her hands resting on Rebecca's still subtle baby bump. Across the aisle, Andrew held the hands of two deaf students who were hearing the music through the vibrations of the floor. Richard realized this was the happiest moment of his life, not just because he had regained his daughter, but because he had discovered a purpose greater than any business success he'd ever achieved. When Rebecca finished, the entire theater rose in a standing ovation that lasted over 15 minutes. People wept, embraced, and celebrated not just the music, but the transformation they had witnessed. Backstage, after the event, Richard gathered his family and collaborators. "Do you know what I've learned these past few years?" he said. "What, Dad?" Rebecca asked. "I've learned it's never too late to change. That love is stronger than pride. And that music has the power to heal wounds we thought were incurable." Emily smiled. "Mr. Thompson, you taught me something too." "What's that?" "That sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need our help the most. And that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing love over bitterness." Eleanor, despite her age, had energy for one last word. "My dears, you've given me the greatest gift a grandmother could ask for, a family reunited. And now we'll have a baby to carry on this story of love and music." 6 months later, on the day of Olivia's birth, Richard's first grandchild, the conservatory held a special concert. Babies and young children were welcome, and the repertoire included lullabies and playful tunes. Richard cradled Olivia as he watched Emily conduct the youth orchestra. The baby seemed mesmerized by the sounds, her tiny hands moving as if trying to catch the musical notes. "Grandpa will teach you to play piano," he whispered in her ear. "But this time, I'll do everything differently. I'll teach you that music is about joy, expression, and love." Rebecca, still recovering from childbirth, watched from the front row with Andrew. Seeing her father with Olivia was one of the most beautiful sights she'd ever witnessed. He had become the kind, patient grandfather she always knew was inside him. During the concert, Emily paused for a special announcement. "Dear friends," she said into the microphone, "today we celebrate not just the 3rd anniversary of our conservatory, but also the birth of Olivia, who represents the new generation that will grow up in a world where music is accessible to everyone." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to say a few words?" Richard stepped onto the stage, still holding Olivia, who slept peacefully in his arms. "My friends, 3 years ago, I believed music was about perfection, about elitism, about unchanging tradition. Today, holding my granddaughter in my arms, I understand that music is about the future, about possibilities, about love that multiplies." He looked at Emily. "Emily, you saved me from a life of bitterness. Rebecca, you taught me the true meaning of forgiveness. Andrew, you brought joy back to our family. And Olivia," he glanced at the baby in his arms, "you represent the hope that future generations will grow up in a world more musical, more connected, more human." The theater erupted in applause, but this time it was different. It was applause celebrating life, family, and music as a transformative force. In the years that followed, the conservatory became a model for other cities across the country. Emily received invitations to replicate the project in different states, always with Richard's support, who had become a consultant specializing in transforming cultural institutions. Rebecca developed a unique music teaching methodology that combined classical technique with popular elements, earning invitations to lecture at conservatories worldwide. Olivia grew up surrounded by music. Her first sounds were attempts to mimic the melodies she constantly heard around her. By age 2, she could already play simple rhythms on the piano. Richard, now nearly 60, had become the most devoted grandfather in the world. He spent hours with Olivia, teaching her not just music, but values like patience, perseverance, and compassion. One day when Olivia was 3, she asked, "Grandpa, why were you sad before I was born?" Richard was surprised by his granddaughter's perceptive question. "Who told you I was sad, my princess?" "Mommy, She said you were sad because you didn't know how to talk to her. Richard smiled, amazed by the child's understanding. It's true, Olivia. Grandpa didn't know how to tell Mommy how much I loved her, but a very special lady taught me. Aunt Emily. That's right. Aunt Emily taught me that love is shown through actions, not just words, and that music can heal broken hearts. Grandpa, will you teach me how to heal hearts with music? Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. Yes, my princess, I'll teach you everything I've learned about music, about love, and about forgiveness. On the conservatory's 5th anniversary, Richard was invited to speak at a national music education conference. The title of his presentation was Personal Transformation Through Music: How an Authoritarian Businessman Became a Humanitarian Educator. During his talk, he shared his full story, from his years of rigidity to his reconciliation with Rebecca. He spoke about how Emily had been instrumental not just in his personal transformation, but in creating a model for inclusive music education. Ladies and gentlemen, he said at the end, I've learned it's never too late to change. That pride can destroy families, but love can rebuild them. And that music has the unique power to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The question I'm always asked is, how can someone change so drastically? The answer is simple. When you find something greater than your own ego, when you realize your life can serve a higher purpose, transformation isn't just possible, it's inevitable. The audience, filled with educators from across the nation, gave him a standing ovation. Many approached him afterward to ask how they could implement similar projects in their own cities. Richard realized his story had become a source of inspiration for other music education professionals. He decided to write a book about his experience, with all proceeds going to the conservatory's scholarship fund. The book, titled Notes of Reconciliation: How Music Taught Me to Love, was released on the conservatory's 6th anniversary. The launch event was transformed into a grand festival, featuring performances by all the groups and alumni. Emily, now established as one of the country's most respected theatre directors, gave the opening speech. Friends, when I first met Richard Thompson 6 years ago, he was a man who had forgotten how to listen. Today he is someone who teaches others to hear not just music, but their own hearts. She turned to him. Richard, thank you for letting me be part of this incredible journey. Thank you for showing that transformation is possible at any age, under any circumstances. Richard took the stage for the official book launch. Beside him stood Rebecca, Andrew, Olivia, now 4 years old, and Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, who at 90 still attended every conservatory event. This book isn't my story, Richard said. It's our story. The story of a family that was lost and found again, of a community that discovered music's transformative power, of young people who found in art a way to overcome social and personal limitations. He lifted Olivia into his arms. But above all, it's a story about hope, about how it's never too late to start over, to ask for forgiveness, to choose love over pride. Olivia, ever curious, asked into the microphone, Grandpa, can I play piano for everyone? The audience laughed and applauded. Richard carried her to the grand piano on stage. Of course, sweetheart. Play your favorite song. With her tiny hands, Olivia began a childlike rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was simple, with a few wrong notes, but played with so much love and joy that not a single person in the theatre was left without a smile. Richard watched his granddaughter play and marveled at life's incredible turns. From a bitter man who once tried to sabotage a musical performance, he had become the grandfather of a child who already showed a natural love for music. When Olivia finished, the ovation was thunderous. She grinned into the microphone and said, Thank you. When I grow up, I'll play to heal hearts, just like Aunt Emily taught Grandpa. Richard hugged her, overcome with emotion. In that moment, he knew his transformation was complete. Not only had he changed, but he had created a legacy that would endure for generations. Backstage after the event, Emily approached him. Richard, I have one last surprise for you. What is it? I got a call yesterday. The National Endowment for the Arts wants to turn our conservatory model into a national public policy. They want our help implementing similar projects in 100 American cities over the next 5 years. Richard was speechless. Emily, this means our little experiment will become a national movement for inclusive music education. Exactly. But that's incredible. How many lives will we be able to touch? Tens of thousands of young people will have access to quality music education. Hundreds of families could have their stories transformed, just like ours was. Richard embraced Emily, grateful for everything she had made possible. Emily, when you first stepped onto that stage and I tried to sabotage your performance, I never imagined it would be the start of something so much greater. Richard, sometimes the moments that feel like our worst failures are actually the seeds of our greatest successes. They looked at the stage, where Olivia was still playing the piano, now accompanied by other young students from the conservatory. It was a vision of the future, of continuity, of hope. "You know something, Emily," said Richard. "What?" "I finally understand what my father wanted when he built this theatre. It wasn't about status or tradition. It was about creating a space where music could touch lives, where art could be a force for social transformation." And did we honor that vision? We did much more than that. We expanded that vision into something he never imagined possible. Years later, when Olivia was already 10 years old and played the piano with the skill of someone much older, Richard often took her to visit the new conservatories that had been established across the country. In every city they visited, they found stories similar to theirs, families reconciled through music, young people discovering unexpected talents, communities coming together around musical projects. During one of these trips in San Diego, Olivia asked, "Grandpa, do you regret being angry with Mommy before?" Richard stopped walking and knelt to her level. "Olivia, I deeply regret hurting your mum. But you know what? If I hadn't made those mistakes, maybe I never would have learned the lessons I did, and you, me, and Mommy wouldn't have the beautiful relationship we have today." So, sometimes mistakes can be good? Mistakes are never good, my princess. But what we do after them can be very good. When we ask for forgiveness, when we try to fix what we've broken, when we learn to be better people. Olivia thought for a moment. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to help other families like you helped each other." Richard smiled, knowing his granddaughter had inherited not just the family's musical talent, but also the understanding that music could be a tool for healing. "I'm sure you will, Olivia. And Grandpa will be here to help you with whatever you need." That night in his hotel room, Richard wrote in his journal, a habit he had developed while writing his book. "Today I realized that my journey of transformation wasn't just about becoming a better father or a more compassionate businessman. It was about becoming an instrument through which music could reach places and people I never thought possible. Emily taught me to listen with my heart. Rebecca taught me to forgive and be forgiven. Olivia teaches me every day that true love is simple, pure, and endless. I am a blessed man." On the conservatory's 10th anniversary, Richard, now 65, was honored as Personality of the Decade in American Music Education. The event was held in the same theater where it all began, but the space had since been expanded to seat 1,200 people. The program included performances from conservatories across all regions of the US, many of them modeled after the original in New York City. There were also virtual appearances from similar projects that had emerged in other Latin American countries, inspired by the American experience. During the tribute ceremony, a video played featuring testimonials from hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the work of Richard, Emily, and Rebecca. There were former students who were now teachers, parents who had reconciled with their children, professional musicians who had discovered their talents in community conservatories. When it was time for Richard to receive the honor, Olivia, now 12, was called to the stage to present it. "Grandpa," she said into the microphone, "you taught me that music isn't just about playing the right notes, it's about touching hearts. Thank you for showing me that love multiplies when it's shared." Richard received the plaque, but before speaking, he called Emily and Rebecca to the stage. "This honor isn't just mine," he said. "It's ours. Emily, you were the spark that started our transformation. Rebecca, you were the courage that made our reconciliation possible. Together, you taught me that music is the universal language of love. He looked out at the packed audience. 10 years ago, I tried to stop a young blind pianist from performing on this stage. Today, that same young woman leads a national movement that has brought music to over 50,000 American children. If that isn't proof that we should never underestimate the power of music and forgiveness, I don't know what is. The standing ovation lasted nearly 20 minutes. At the end, the entire theater sang along to a song composed especially for the occasion by Rebecca and Olivia, titled Symphony of Reconciliation. The end. What an incredible story, isn't it? Richard learned that it's never too late to change and that pride can be overcome by love. Now tell me, do you believe it's possible to soften a hardened heart through music? Do you know a similar story in your family? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and if this story touched your heart in a special way. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.